Remote and dial-up connections. More and more people are working outside of the office these days, such as working from home a couple of days a week or even being out on the road. And this is going to require that our remote users have a network connection to the office so that they can check email and access other network services. And that's the main focus of this video, how to connect to our company network from a remote location. So let's bring up a whiteboard and talk about that. We're going to learn how to establish a remote access connection to our office by using dial-up connections and broadband connections. And to transmit our data securely to our office, we'll learn how to create a virtual private connection. But in order to get connected to our office, we need to have our username and our password authenticated. We'll look at the protocols involved with that process and the protocols that are used to encrypt our data that's being transmitted to and from our office. And lastly, we'll see how we can turn Windows XP Professional into a mini remote access server to allow other people to connect to our computer. We are going to focus on two methods for establishing a remote access connection: dial-up and broadband. Dial-up means that we have an analog modem that's going to connect to our telephone line, which we can use to directly connect to our corporate office or the internet using the point-to-point protocol, or PPP for short. This is a remote access protocol that's supported by Windows NT, Windows 2000, Windows.NET remote access servers, and it's supported by most internet service providers as well. PPP allows for the dynamic assignment of IP addresses through a DHCP server, and also allows for the logon credentials to be encrypted. Most remote access connections are still made through dial-up connections. However, what's becoming more available and more affordable is establishing a high-speed connection by using broadband media, such as ISDN lines, which stands for Integrated Services Digital Network, or what's become very popular is the use of your TV cable line to establish a cable modem connection to the internet at a very high speed. To establish a broadband connection to the internet through our cable modem, we just have to obtain an IP address either statically or dynamically assigned from our cable provider, and then we're up and running. So let's close out of here and take a look at the two methods for establishing a remote access connection. To establish a remote access connection, we use the New Connection Wizard in the Network Connections folder, and we get to that folder by clicking on Start, then click Control Panel, and then from here double click on Network Connections, and that takes us to the Network Connections folder. This folder provides us one central location for managing all the different type of network connections that we might have: dial-up, broadband, and other connections such as wireless. So to establish a remote access connection, we're just going to click on Create a New Connection. Do that right now. That fires up the New Connection Wizard, a little happy welcome page here. Just click on Next. This wizard has changed a little bit from Windows 2000, but it still gives us pretty much the same options. Let's first look at the options for establishing a dial-up connection to the internet. So we'll click on Next. From here we have three methods for establishing a connection to the internet through an internet service provider. If I don't already have an account with an internet service provider or an ISP, allow me to establish an account using this option. Or if I do have an account with an ISP, allow me to manually enter in my information so I can get connected to the internet. Or if I have a CD-ROM from my internet service provider, just stick the CD-ROM into the computer and allow the CD-ROM to configure Windows XP so I can get connected to the internet. We're going to choose this middle option and see how we can manually get connected to the internet. So now we just click on Next, and from this page we have three options as to how we're going to manually connect to the internet. The first option allows us to choose an analog or an ISDN modem to establish our connection, and then the next two options allow us to get connected by using a broadband connection. The second option is used when we're establishing a broadband connection to an internet service provider that requires a username and a password for authentication before we can get connected to the internet. And this is referred to as Point-to-Point Protocol over Ethernet, or PPoE for short. However, most broadband connections don't require username and password, so we could just choose this option when we're using, for example, a cable modem that's connected to the back of our Windows XP computer and has an always-on connection, meaning that We don't have to establish a dial-up connection, or we don't have to enter in a username or password. We just open up our web browser and we're on the internet. So let's continue forward with establishing a dial-up connection using our modem. So just click on next. Now we enter in the name of our internet service provider. I'm just going to type in Joe ISP and click on next. And now we type in the phone number to get connected to the ISP. And this could either be a 1-800 number or a local number. I'm just going to type in a fake local number here for my area code. And then we click on next. This page is asking us, would we like the shortcut that I'm going to create that's used to actually connect to your internet service provider with be available for every single user profile or just your profile? Meaning, do I want to allow this shortcut to be available for every single user that logs on or just me? We'll be friendly and allow this to be used by anybody who logs on to the computer here, so we'll just click on next. And now we're asked to enter in our username and our password that's going to be used to establish the connection to our internet service provider. And we'd have to obtain this information from our internet service provider. So with that information in hand, we type in our username, type in what our password is. And because we had selected in the previous page, allow the shortcut to be available for every user profile, it's now asking us, would you like anybody to use your username and password to get connected to the internet? I'm going to deselect this option here. So that means other people who try to use this telephone number to get connected to our internet service provider will have to provide their own username and password. And would we like to make this the default connection for getting connected to the internet? Meaning that Internet Explorer will automatically use this connection for getting connected to the internet. And once we've established a connection, would we like to enable Internet Connection Firewall to protect us from intruders on the internet? We cover Internet Connection Firewall in our Internet Connection Sharing and Internet Connection Firewall video in this Windows XP series. So we're going to click on Next and go forward, where we see the finished screen, which provides us a summary of the options that we had selected. And would we like to place a shortcut on our desktop for convenience? Yeah, sure, why not? And then we just click on Finito. There we go. It's creating the shortcut, and here is our connection. So now all we'd have to do to get connected to the internet is just click on the dial button and we'd be off to the races. It would dial this phone number, provide our username and password that we had entered, which is hidden here from view, and that would be it. And if we close out of here, we'll see that a shortcut has been created in our Network Connections folder in a new category called Dial-Up. So we see that our dial-up connection has been created. We're not connected right now, but we are protected when we are connected by using the Internet Connection Firewall. So that's the 1, 2, 3s of establishing a dial-up connection to the internet. If our company has a remote access server, we can establish a dial-up connection to that server by also using the Create a New Connection wizard. So let's fire this up and take a look at that now. Just click on Next. This time around, we're going to click on the second option, Connect to the network at my workplace using a dial-up or a VPN connection. We'll cover VPN connections after this section. So now we just continue forward and click on Next. We're going to continue with creating a dial-up connection. And this process is almost identical to creating a connection to our internet service provider. We're typing in a name, say my company, helps if I can spell here. Click on Next. What's the telephone number that my company has provided? Maybe it's a 1-800 number, maybe it's a local number. I'm going to try, say, a make-believe 1-800 number here. And then click on Next. And same deal, would we like to make this shortcut available for every user profile or just our user profile? Click on Next. And the one thing it hadn't asked us for is our username and password. So now we're going to click on Finish, and from here we can type in our username and password and then click on Dial to get connected to our company. With this type of connection, we're not connecting to the internet at all. We're connecting directly to our company's Windows NT or Windows 2000 or Windows.NET remote access server using the telephone number and the username and password that we provide. That also means that it provides for a fairly high degree of security for the data and the email that we're transmitting from our remote access connection to our actual company's remote access server. The disadvantage of establishing a dial-up connection to our remote access servers is that our company would have to spend a lot of money to support the 1-800 number or pay for the long-distance bills that our employees incur to connecting to a local telephone number. Not only do they incur the cost of the telephone bill, but they also incur the cost of the computer hardware that's required to support a remote access server. If we have thousands of employees, we would need many servers with many modems that have many telephone lines, and that could be a big bill at the end of the day. So another method to allow our employees to remotely connect to our company's network securely is to allow them to get connected to the internet. And once they're connected to the internet, we'll establish a secure tunnel through the internet to our corporate network. Let's see how we do that now by closing out of here. So let's bring up a whiteboard and talk about this a little further here. So step one is to create a dial-up connection to an internet service provider on our Windows XP computer. So we get connected to the internet service provider using the point-to-point protocol, which in turn gets us connected to the internet. But that does not get us connected to our company's remote access server. To get connected to our company's remote access server, this could be NT or Windows 2000 or .NET, we have to establish a virtual private connection through the internet using either the point-to-point tunneling protocol or the Layer 2 tunneling protocol with IPsec for security. These protocols allow us to create a secure tunnel through our internet connection to our company's remote access server, and then from there we can check our email and access other network resources. These protocols create this secure tunnel by encapsulating data packets that are inside our point-to-point protocol packets, which means that the packets that are being sent across the internet are protected against intruders from the internet who might be trying to intercept those packets as they're being transmitted from us to our company's remote access server. This process allows us to leverage this worldwide network called the internet and gain access to our company's remote access server, and thus our email and everything else, from almost any location in the world these days. To establish a VPN connection with these protocols, we don't necessarily have to have a dial-up connection. We just need a connection to the internet. So that connection to the internet could be broadband or dial-up. However, at this point, dial-up connections are more available than high-speed broadband connections, especially from hotel rooms. So let's go with the scenario of first connecting to the internet with a dial-up connection, and once we've established that connection, we'll establish a virtual private network connection through the internet to our company's remote access server. And so let's see how we do that. We'll close out of here, go back to our network connections folder. So for step one, we just double click on our dial-up connection to the internet, click on dial, and establish that connection. And then step two requires that we fire up the create a new connection wizard to create a virtual private connection. So we'll do that now by clicking on next. And from here we're going to choose the second option, connect to the network at my workplace. Click on next. Now we're going to choose virtual private network connection. Click on next. Enter in our company name. This is my company. And click on next. This is kind of a cool option. Our VPN connection can make sure that we're actually connected to the internet first by automatically dialing the internet connection that's displayed here. For this example, I'm going to manually establish the VPN connection, so I'm going to choose do not dial the initial connection. Then we're going to click on next. Now we have to enter in the host name or IP address for a company's remote access server that we're going to create a virtual private connection with. I've established a Windows 2000 a remote access server at the IP address of 192.168.1.21, so we're going to connect to this server, and let's click on next. Would we like this connection to be available for everybody or just for us? We'll leave it at just for us for right now. Click on next, and then a summary of the options we had selected here. We've created the My Company VPN, and let's finish this off. And here we have the connect to My Company VPN connection. And then from here we just type in our username and our password. But if our remote access server is in a NT or Windows 2000 based domain, our user account and password would have to be authenticated by a domain controller. but there's no option here, there's no field here to specify which domain we're trying to be authenticated by. Well, we can expose that field by clicking on Properties, and then from here we click on the Options tab, and then from here we choose Include Windows Logon Domain, click on OK, and now we can specify the domain that's going to authenticate our username and our password. So once we've provided that information, the next step is just to click on the Connect button. I'm using the ultra secure password of blank. Kids, don't do that at home. I recommend that in a corporate environment you do have a very secure password, but for this demonstration I just have a blank password. So we're going to click on Connect. Authenticated, bada boom, bada bing. And if we scroll down here a little bit, we see a virtual private connection icon, and the blue color indicates that it's running. If we double click on this, we can check the status of our virtual private connection. We're connected. We've been connected for a few seconds. And let's take a look at the details of the connection. And from here we can see that we established a PPP connection. And then through that PPP connection we established a virtual private connection that we see right here. And this is the IP address that we were assigned. And we're authenticated. Our username and our password was authenticated by using this protocol, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So in this example, all I did was establish a virtual private network connection to a remote access server within my network. But normally we're going to connect to the internet either through our dial-up connection or a broadband connection, then establish the virtual private connection as we did. The protocol that was used to create the virtual private connection is the point-to-point tunneling protocol. And then the protocol that's used to encrypt the data through this virtual private connection is the Microsoft point-to-point encryption protocol, and the data is being encrypted at 128 bits. And the protocol that authenticated our username and password is MS-CHAP version 2. So let's close out of here and talk about some of the details of what we see here. And we'll do that by bringing up a whiteboard. So as you see here, Windows XP supports several authentication protocols for remote access. Some are for backward compatibility and some are just used for Windows operating systems. The first authentication protocol, PAP, stands for Password Authentication Protocol, and this is used more for backward compatibility. It's been around for a long time. A lot of remote access servers supports this authentication protocol. However, your username and your password is transmitted in clear text, meaning that somebody on the internet could easily detect your username and password with this authentication protocol because the password and username is not encrypted. It's just like a text file being sent across the internet. The SPAP protocol stands for the Shiva Password Authentication Protocol, and in this example the Windows XP computer would first connect to a Shiva Land Rover server, which would provide authentication for our Windows XP computer, and then we would connect to our Windows remote access server. And this method allows us to encrypt our password, but it does not encrypt the data. The CHAP protocol, or Challenge Handshake Authentication, encrypts our user credentials, but it doesn't encrypt the data. And this protocol is used more for when we have non-Microsoft operating systems that are trying to connect to and be authenticated by Windows remote access servers. If we're using Windows operating systems to connect to a Windows remote access server, we'll be authenticated either using the Microsoft Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol version 1 or version 2. MS-CHAP version 1 is used to authenticate Windows NT4, Windows 95, and Windows 98 dial-up clients. In contrast, Windows 2000 and Windows XP computers can, as a default, use MS-CHAP version 2 for dial-up connections and VPN connections, whereas NT4, Windows 95, and Windows 98 can only use MS-CHAP version 2 for VPN connections. That's it. MS-CHAP version 1 is pretty high-level security. It allows us to encrypt our user credentials and our data, but MS-CHAP version 2, as you can guess, goes a step higher. It provides mutual authentication, which means that our computer has to authenticate with the server, and then the server has to authenticate with our computer. And this helps to protect against a hacker pretending to be our RAS server, our remote access server. As a default, Windows 2000 and Windows XP computers will attempt to authenticate using MS-CHAP version 2 first. And out of this list of authentication protocols, MS-CHAP 2 is the most secure form of authentication. However, Windows 2000 and Windows XP computers also have the option of authenticating using smart cards and other devices through the use of another protocol called the Extensible Authentication Protocol. And let's take a look at that by bringing up another whiteboard. This protocol is only found in Windows 2000 and Windows XP and higher operating systems. It's not available for Windows NT or Windows 95 or Windows 98. This is a newer protocol that allows us to use up-and-coming authentication methods such as smart card readers or biometric devices such as using our fingerprint or retinal scans for being authenticated. Smart cards are an alternative to using passwords for authentication, and the actual smart card device is about the size of a credit card, and it has a digital certificate embedded into it, and the certificate contains encrypted information that's used for authentication, and the smart card is fed into a smart card reader that's connected to the Windows XP computer. Well, when we're using smart cards for remote access authentication, we have to first be authenticated to the remote access server, and then once we've established that authentication, we're going to use the EAP protocol in combination with another component that's used with EAP called TLS, or the Transport Layer Security. This component right here is required in order for authentication to occur with smart cards. Let's close out of here now and take a look at our different authentication options that we have on our VPN connection. And to take a look at those options, let's go to our VPN connection, which is right here, and we'll click on the properties of that connection, and then from here we're going to click on the security tab. The default security option is set to typical required secured password, and that means that Windows XP will try to use MS-CHAP version 2 first for authentication, and if the server isn't using MS-CHAP version 2, it'll try MS-CHAP version 1, and if all else fails, it'll try to use just the challenge handshake authentication protocol for authentication. Also, if we're using MS-CHAP version 1 or version 2, we can encrypt our data. And with this option selected, it means that the server also has to enable data encryption or the connection will be dropped. This option allows us to automatically log on to our VPN connection with the same username, password, and domain information that we had logged on to our Windows XP computer with. The other typical setting that we have available here is to authenticate using our smart card. The typical settings work well when we have all Windows XP computers or all Windows 2000 computers, but if we have a mixture of computers, Windows 95 and Windows NT, and a mixture of remote access servers, we might have to choose some custom settings to try to stay on equal footing with all of our other Windows operating systems. So let's take a look at those settings by clicking on the settings button. Because we had selected smart card as our typical recommended security setting, the Extensible Authentication Protocol has selected smart card for its authentication method, or we can come in here and manually choose the authentication protocols that we want for remote access. So this is a listing of the authentication protocols we've taken a look at. The default selection is for Windows XP to use MS-CHAP. We have another option here that allows us to connect into Windows 95 computers that are acting as remote access servers. They have their own special brew of Microsoft Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol for that purpose. Also, as soon as we had manually selected one of these authentication protocols that deselected the Extensible Authentication Protocol with Smart Card, because we're now going to authenticate with one of these protocols. Also, if we want to make sure that our data is encrypted, make sure we have this option up here selected, Require Encryption. And data encryption is only available if we choose either MS-CHAP, MS-CHAP version 2, or Extensible Authentication Protocol. So for example, if I deselect these options and choose unencrypted password and then click on OK, it's going to give me a big old warning here saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to encrypt the data unless you use EAP or version 1 or version 2 of MS Chat. Okay, no problem. We'll deselect that, select that, and then we're good to go. So let's continue forward now by clicking on our networking tab. And from here we can manually determine what type of protocol is going to be used to establish our virtual private connection. The default is to let Windows XP automatically determine out of which of these two protocols should be used. And the default in our example was the point-to-point tunneling protocol was used. But Windows 2000 and Windows.NET servers can also use the Layer 2 tunneling protocol and use IPsec to provide data encryption with this protocol as well. This requires that a digital certificate be assigned to our computer in order to use this protocol. This is an industry standard protocol, and it provides a little bit of a higher degree of security than our point-to-point tunneling protocol, but this is only available for Windows 2000 and Windows XP computers and Windows.NET computers. Windows NT, Windows 95, Windows 98 don't have the capability of using Layer 2 tunneling protocol with IPsec. Then our typical network connections are found below, such as how is an IP address going to be assigned to the computer? Will it be dynamically assigned, or are we going to type one in? And this is the quality of service packet scheduler to provide network traffic flow. And then are we going to enable file and printer sharing for Microsoft Networks? And are we a client in a Microsoft network? And then lastly, the Advanced tab allows us to enable Internet Connection Firewall or Internet Connection Sharing. And these two topics we cover in the Internet Connection Sharing and Internet Connection Firewall video. The connections that we've created so far for the dial-up connection to the Internet and our VPN connections are all referred to as outbound connections. We're going out from our computer to somewhere out on the network. Well, Windows XP also allows us to create an inbound connection to allow computers to dial into our computer. So let's close out of here and see how we do that. And okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. So to create an inbound connection, we're going to fire up the good old create a new connection wizard. So let's do that right now. We click on next. And then from here we choose set up an advanced connection, and then we click on next. And then we choose accept an incoming connection. The other option that we have is to connect a serial cable from our computer to another computer. We're going to go with the incoming connections option. Click on next. So this requires that your computer has a modem, and you're going to provide the people that are going to connect to your computer the telephone number that's going to be used to connect to this modem. So our modem is selected as a default, then we just click on next. And now we're asked to determine whether or not we'd like to enable a virtual private connection to allow people to securely send their data from their computer to our computer. Absolutely. Let's click on next. And then which users would you like to allow to establish this connection to your computer? So these are the users that have already been created on this computer. So I just go through the list and select or deselect the users that I'd like to grant the dial-in permission to our Windows XP computer. So then I click on next. This dialog box shows us the default network software that's used for establishing an inbound connection to our computer. And the default protocol is Internet Protocol, and our default client is our Microsoft client. And this allows us to determine how a TCP/IP address will be assigned to an inbound request. So if we click on our Properties button, we can automatically assign an IP address to the computer that's trying to connect to us through a DHCP server. Or we could become a mini DHCP server and specify our own range of IP addresses by typing in those that range of IP addresses right here. That might be, say, 20 to 30, something like that. And we can also allow the person who's trying to connect to our computer just to specify their own IP address. And lastly, once they're connected to our computer, would we like to allow that user that's connected to our computer to also see the network that our computer might be connected on? So if we're in a Windows 2000 domain and we can access printers and files and folders, the person connected to us will pass through our connection to also see all the other resources that are available on their network. I'll close out of here. We'll click on cancel. So let's finish up by clicking on next. Then we click on finish to create our incoming connections icon in our network connections folder. And bada boom, bada bing, here it is. So now what's going to happen is when another computer is trying to establish an incoming connection to our computer, our modem will answer the phone, if you will, and establish that incoming connection for the people that we had given the permission to connect to our computer. And we can see a list of those people once again by just simply double clicking on this icon. And we see our modem. Do we want to allow users to make a private connection to this computer through a VPN? So we see that option here. And the list of users that can connect to our computer are listed right here, so we can add more users or deselect these users. Also, for the users that we've allowed to connect to our computer, should we also require those users to secure their passwords and data? That would be a good idea. So if you notice here, we're allowing several users to establish an incoming connection to our computer. However, Windows XP will only allow the maximum of 3 concurrent connections, meaning only 3 people can be simultaneously connected to the computer at any one time. However, those 3 connections have to be of different connection types, meaning I can only have 1 dial-up, 1 VPN, and 1 direct cable connection occurring at any given time. So watch out for those limitations. And lastly, if we have a Palm Top device, an iPad device that's connected directly to the computer, would we like that device to be able to connect without providing a password? Yes or no? And then the networking tab allows us to access our networking options that we saw before, add or change any options. So there we go. We click on OK. And then once somebody has established a connection, kind of a cool feature in Windows XP is that you would see the name of the person on this icon that had established an incoming connection to your computer. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of this video. Let's bring up our whiteboard and do a little recap of what we covered. So in this video, we learned how to create dial-up connections to private networks and to the internet, and how to use our connection wizard to create a broadband connection to the internet. We also saw how we can secure our connection to the internet by creating a virtual private connection through the internet. And we also saw which protocols are involved for authentication to remote access servers. And lastly, we finished off by seeing how we can turn our Windows XP computer into a little mini remote access server by creating inbound connections. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this video has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.